Greetings, everyone. I just have some random thoughts that I would like to share. And what I've been thinking about is xenophobia in the black community, if we can say that we have black communities. Now, what is a community? Is a community just where a bunch of black people live, but they don't own the land on which they live, where they are basically just renting? And they don't own any of the land on which they are occupying. Is that in fact really your community? I probably live in one of the few truly black communities in the United States where most of, if not all, the black community where I live in North Carolina, we own the land that we live on. We own it. So we can rightly say we live in a community. But if you don't own the land, then you have no say in who comes and goes within that land. You know, when we look across the United States and we see quote unquote black communities being occupied by the modern slave catchers, the police, and they're killing black people in the streets and also turning them into modern day slaves. How can we say that those are our communities when we are not in control of those communities or anything that's happening in that community? We are not in control. So, you know, I just want to address xenophobia because there are people in the black diaspora or the African diaspora that I truly respect. I respect them and their thoughts and their viewpoints on various social political issues that face us as black people behind the enemy lines of USA Inc., where they still practicing slavery via the 13th Amendment. And I just don't think that I can get down with that. I just see it as being irrational. I see it as misdirected ill will towards people who I consider to be refugees fleeing the war-torn, destabilized regions that they live in. And I'm talking particularly about those coming across the southern border of the United States. Now, we know that the United States government, along with corporations for decades, if not over 100 years, have been exploiting these people's homelands, exploiting the people themselves, have caused so much violence. When we look at the drug war violence, let's just look at Mexico. You know, tens of thousands of people being killed by a war that is not really a war on so-called drugs, but a war on people. They want the drugs to be in the United States because they want people to use the drugs. Then they also want people to sell the drugs. They can't find gainful employment. Why do they want them to sell the drugs? So they can keep the slave catchers employed, so they can keep the prison plantation overseers employed, to fill the pockets of the investors in the private prisons. And so I just think this xenophobia that some of us have in the quote unquote black community towards these people, these refugees coming across the southern border, I just really think it's irrational. And you know, if you think that way, then you must agree with the white people, the Europeans we see in these European countries like Germany, like Norway or Sweden, or even France, and their xenophobia. And we could also say a lot of it's based in racism. Racism against African descendant people, racism against Muslims, racism against non-Christians as well. Well, that would be religious bigotry. And so, you know, I'm starting to see, or I'm starting to think that some of the commentary that I'm hearing from those in the black community is mirroring the xenophobic white racists in Europe, as well as the white racists here in the United States. And, you know, that just doesn't seem to be logical to me. I also do not think that it's practicing justice. So just wanted to offer my random thoughts on that. Now, I would say to the people coming across the border into the United States that if you think that you're coming here to live the American dream, that this is a land of great opportunity, you're sadly mistaken. All right, there is tremendous poverty in the United States. There is tremendous unemployment. And quite frankly, a lot of you are ending up in prisons, or in private prisons that I call plantations. Because see, here in the United States, regardless of what you may heard, regardless of what people in the United States believe, slavery was not abolished in the United States by the Civil War. They are still allowed to practice slavery if they can convict somebody of a crime. Convict them of drug possession, convict them of vagrancy, convict them for drug dealing, just like if they convict you of entering the country illegally. Well, really, they don't even have to convict you. They can just round you up and put you on into one of these prison plantations where I guess you'll wait for your immigration hearing and a determination of whether you're going to be sent back or not. But you can languish years in these private prison plantations as a source of cheap and free labor, just like how black people are being used as cheap and free labor in these prisons, whether they're private prisons, whether they're state-run prisons, or whether they're prisons run by the federal government. You know, I really, really admire the revolutionaries, our ancestors, our elders of the Black Panther Party. And, you know, they started out, you know, basically as a black, I guess we could call them black nationalists. They were concerned about the plight of black people being preyed upon by the slave catchers, being put into prisons, providing cheap labor. And that's how they started out. But as they grew, as they matured as a political organization, they became what we might call internationalists, international revolutionaries. And they reached out and established connections with people all over the planet and trying to, you know, unite with them against the common oppressor. So I just can't get down with the xenophobia. First of all, if you don't own the land, then you don't have a community. And if you don't have a community, you don't have any say-so over the land of who comes and who goes. I just think it's irrational thought. I do know it's coming from a good place. You know, I don't think that these people are being evil and mean to immolate the racists that we see in the news media, whether they be in Europe or whether they be here in the United States. I know their primary concern is for black people. You know, that's just a natural tendency, a tendency that I have to empathize with my own cultural and ethnic group. You know, I don't even consider myself an American because I don't want to be associated with any of the evil things that the United States government, USA Inc., is doing all over the planet to mistreat people. And so if anybody is to blame, if we're going to put any demands on anybody, then we need to be demanding that USA Inc. and these multinational corporations stop destabilizing these other nations, which is causing a mass influx of refugees. I'm black first, but at the same time, I believe in practicing justice, and I certainly will not immolate these white racists. So if you have any thoughts that you would like to share on that, feel free. You know, we ain't got to agree on everything. You know, we're not going to see eye to eye on everything. And so I just want to start a dialogue. You know, I ain't mad at nobody. I hope y'all ain't mad at me. But let's talk about this. Is it rational for us to be xenophobic? You know, and taking the same viewpoint as we see those Europeans taking towards African immigrants when European nations along with the United States are destabilizing Africa and destroying their homelands and making these places unlivable. for these people, and that's why they fleeing. Who wants to leave their homeland? They, not me, So anyway, those are my thoughts. Feel free to share yours.